Hi, so today we'll be discussing about sports data. So the main agenda is to understand what are the components are there in the sports data and how these data are getting captured and how we should look upon all those things. Fine. So whenever we are talking about a sports data, we need to understand which data we need to consider. And because there are different types of data whenever we are talking about a performance or injuries, fine, because these two terms are much more bigger terms right now, because performance is not only about one data point, and same applies to injuries. So we need to understand what are the data we need to capture so that we can have a certain sort of insights regarding these two component over here. So data is basically a piece of information so that we are talking about. Okay, so it can be in the form of numerical, categorical, textual, images, audio. Fine. So there are so many types of data right now, and whenever we are trying to talk about sports science or analytics, the data will be in the form of sports science data that is basically confined to sports science verticals like sports medicine, physical therapy, biomechanics, nutrition, exercise physiology, anthropometry, psychology. And we need to understand how these data are getting captured in all these verticals. Because if you're unable to understand how these data are getting captured, it will be later on quite difficult to have a certain sort of much more informed decision making. In a similar context, we can also look upon a performance outcome data. It's like any sort of performance, that how many runs are scored, or any sort of any metrics specific to that particular sports, like goals, be it in the form of any sports. Fine. So we need to understand that thing also, like a performance outcome data. Apart from that, we need to also understand that marketing and finance sort of data. And these all data are much more related to business acumen. Fine. So whenever we are talking about a player transfer or social media analytics or any sort of sports campaign, so we need to also understand how these data are there, like marketing and finance data. Apart from that, sports related data, like anything specific in nature to that particular sports, that is confined over there. So we need to also know about those sorts of things. Apart from that, we need to consider like commentaries, any sort of newspaper or tweets as in the form of textual data, because it can help us to understand any sort of sentiments or any sort of emotions, and this all things comes in the NLP sort of thing. NLP is basically a natural language processing, and we can infer so many things from those data also. So because there's so much amount of data available right now in the field of sports data, or be it any form of domain, we need to understand that which data we need to consider for study purpose or any sort of research work or any sort of decision making or creating any sort of model. Model over here means any sort of process or any mathematical function so that we can able to understand any sort of informed decision making we can able to get through that. So over here the things will come with the need analysis in a sports science, because sports data is all about what are the things we need to consider whenever we are trying to collect and how we are considering all those things. So that's why we need to understand the data should be in the form of consistent in the nature. Fine. So whatever the metrics we are trying to capture, uh, same metrics needs to be captured across the particular quarter or yearly sort of thing. And those metric should have a certain sort of specific uh, nature so that we can able to discriminate between each player. It should have any sort of specific objectivity, like which metric we need to consider for any sort of valuable informations, be it any sort of performance side or marketing or injury, be it anything. So it has to have certain sort of
चल मैं परसों फोन करता हूँ मैं बात कर रहा रेडी हूँ
uh, Mark, can you then apart from that we need to also understand the specificity of that particular test or metrics over here, and apart from that it should be measurable. So anything we are trying to capture, it should be in a method of so that we can measure it, whether in the form of qualitative data or quantitative data. Apart from that, it has to have certain sort of time bound that in a specific period we need to consider, and there should be any sort of half yearly or quarterly sort of assessment, and it has to be realistic in nature. Fine. So and achievable. All those things should be there whenever we are trying to capture the data in the form of sports. Fine. So this is known as SMART principle over here. And apart from that, we need to also add upon consistent how much data is, and it's to differentiate between whatever the data is we're trying to capture. It is also one of the important thing to understand how the data are being collected so that we can able to maintain data quality and data hygiene. Generally, we think that it is not important how the data are being collected, but as we are talking about a human body performance and injuries point of view, we need to understand how we are storing the data, how we are collecting it, what are the methods are there, what are the tools and technologies we are using for that. So data quality is all about, yeah, Gaurav.
Yeah, so just a question upon data collection. Uh, so just to give you an example in athletics context, like for example, performance can be recorded through the real-time competitions. Then if we want to collect data related to SNC, there can be some tools which we can use similar to that for physios. There can be some tools. So what do you suggest, like which tools should we go with while deciding how to collect the data? Any suggestions on that aspect? Because there are a lot of like tools and technologies available in the market, but how do you go about that process? Which tool or technology to use the collect to collect respective data related to like performance?
Fine. So first of all, we need to understand that what we are trying to measure over there. So then we can able to select any sort of metric. Then we need to select the tools over there. So for example, if you're talking about athletics, fine. So we need to narrow down the events point of view to the events, which event we are targeting. Then depending upon that, we can again narrow down the things as per the energy system also. Fine. Depending upon all this context, again, we can differentiate in the biomechanical point of view, one component, then strength point of view, one component. So it's all about, if you see this slide over here, so we need to have any sort of metric that is going to give a certain sort of objective to that particular context, as well as it is going to be discriminate between each players over there. Fine. So that's why, and again, see, there are so many tools like any sort of force pit, for example. So there are so many force pit available from different companies. Fine. But more or less, all the force pits are giving us same sort of data.
Yeah.
Fine. And same applies to isokinetic dynamometer. Fine. So whenever we are trying to achieve or we want to consider any sort of data collection, first of all, we need to understand that what we are trying to achieve and why we are trying to collect those data. Then we can able to plan it out. Fine. So apart from that, the difficulties are like a cost of those equipment. Fine. So each and every academy, so any institute, these all equipments will be not available. So we need to also understand those things. There are simple methods also to collect the data and complicated complex also. Fine. So we need to look upon the simple things like how much consistent we want to capture those data. Fine. Suppose you're having a force plate, but in case if you're not having a force plate and you want to go to some different academies or different places, what is the frequency or how much frequently you can go to that academy to collect the data over there? That is one sort of limitation because of the cost of transportation and so many things over there. Fine. So we need to also understand that how much consistent we can able to capture those data and how much reliable it is to discriminate all those things and what we're trying to capture from that. So, and how much specific we are trying to capture those things. Fine. So be it any tool, but first of all, we need to understand why we want to capture, and then we can able to relate the things. Fine.
So, what you are suggesting is decide what do we want to collect and then go about the tools. Am I correct? Like,
Yeah. So we need
then
to discuss.
go about.
Yeah. So we need to sit with coaches and support staff and management and all, and we need to create a proper sort of workflow that during a 1 year cycle or whatever the cycle for any particular player or team, we need to create a particular cycles and all those things when we want to do a testing, what testing, why testing, because there are so many factors. Fine. And in our body, so everything is non-linear in nature mostly. Fine. So we need to make a list of test attributes, key performance indicators to that particular sports, and in a similar context we can do all those things. Fine.
Yep, yep, got it. Thanks.
Yeah, because if we think about the sophisticated software and hardwares, sometimes those things are not available, and at that instance if you're not testing, then again it is much more about a gut feeling and intuitions. So there are simple ways to do also and complicated ways also to do all those things. But first of all, we need to capture it. Fine, be it anyway.
Yep,
So whenever we are talking about a data quality, we need to understand the reliability of the data, validity of the data, how much accurate it is, how much complete it is, how much consistent, how much uniform, and how much useful. Fine. Sometimes I have seen that we want to capture all the data. Fine. So I'm having X machine, Y machine, Z machine, A machine, B machine, C machine. That particular player needs to go to all the tests. So do we really need to do all those things? That's the introspection we need to do. Fine. So that is one of the way we need to understand whether we want to do a testing in all the department or all the instrument. Fine. Sometimes it's like we are having all the instruments, we need to do everything. But do we really need to do all those things? That we need to ask from ourselves only. And again, during a practice and all those things, I have seen one more challenge. Fine, that how we want to store a data. So storing a data is one of the complex things. Fine. So whenever the data is getting stored in through the any sort of technologies, it's like a SQL database or no SQL. Fine. So there's some sort of database over there. From there we can export. But however, whenever we are trying to capture data manually, and the storage of those data are again quite questionable here. So data source, there are two ways we can think of, like a technology driven or manual. Fine. So technology, as we say, be it any form, like any cameras. Fine. So video cameras are there. Apart from that, any timing gates, force plate, isokinetic, be it any form of technology. A simple like a watch also. Fine. So technology driven the things, all the things are going to come inside a bracket of technology, and those things are much more accurate and it contains less noise. Noise basically in the form of data means the things that is having the proper form of data, right? And it is much more accurate and dependencies are very much limited over there. Fine. However, whenever we are trying to create a manual sort of testing chapter, uh, at that instance, the data quality will be very much compromised sometimes, and information will be also limited sometimes. Fine. And again, it depends upon the skill set of that particular person who is capturing the data. So how to store a data? There are two tables over here. Fine. So age, height, weight, we are writing 16 years, 20 years, 155 centimeter, and like this. Fine. 55 kg, 65 kg. So we should avoid this sort of practice, because later on, if you want to do any sort of analysis, then it is quite difficult. Fine. Having a 2% data or 3% is doable, but if the data is of huge amount, then this practice should be avoided. So we can able to do that, that we can able to write any sort of unit, anything in the name of, in this place only, like a column areas and all those things. Fine. And it should be in the one form of data, like 155 centimeters, so it should be in the one form only, not like one place meter and centimeter or inch or foot, something sort of. So these are two scenarios over here. Fine. So there are two swimmers. Okay, and there's a team meeting, or in fact management meeting is going on, and the coaches want to seek any sort of guidance from the sports scientist that which swimmer is better for any particular sort of competition. So during this event, we need to have a understanding of how the data are getting captured, which test we are doing, and then we can able to comment and all those things. Fine. So until unless we don't know how the data are getting captured and stored, then it's like, if we don't know the process only depending upon the outcome, then things that we're making a decision will be much more limited. In a similar scenarios, we can have a second scenarios also, in which in any sort of academies, too much of injuries are going on, and you are given a task to identify what are the root causes of injuries. So again, we need to understand the all these processes, how the data are getting captured and how we are storing, and which data we need to capture, likewise. Fine, so this was about the sports data. So thank you so much for your time. So now we can discuss the things if we have any sort of questions. Anyone is having any questions? Anyone is having any questions? Anything to be discussed?
Nope, nothing's come.
Fine, then fine. So the utmost important from all this thing is that we need to understand that what is a process, and how we are capturing the data, and how we are storing it, and where we are storing it. Fine. So what are the levels of privacies we are having in case of storage of data? Who is having an access? And apart from that, those data can be converted into the secondary form of data also. Fine. With the help of certain sort of mathematical functions and all those things over there. So we need to understand all these things. Fine. So this was the thing about this sports data. Fine. So and it will be applicable to all the domains, I believe. Fine. So if no one is having any question, then we can wrap it up. Okay. Fine then. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.